Okay, so when I say Greco-Persian wars, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, right, it's this one single powerful image. An image that's been burned into our minds by history and, let's be honest, by Hollywood.
Yeah, you know the one. The story of 300 Spartans. This tiny, heroic band of warriors making their glorious last stand, all for freedom, against this, this mindless, tyrannical horde. It's the classic tale, right? Western courage versus Eastern chaos.
And here's the thing, that story, it's also one of the most successful and masterful lies in history. The truth is, the Persian invasion of Greece wasn't some chaotic swarm at all. It was an absolute masterpiece of logistics, of engineering, and grand strategy, the likes of which the world had literally never seen before. And once you understand that, well, it changes everything.
All right, so first up, let's talk about the Persian War Machine itself. We've got to separate the myth from the reality.
So the Greek historians, they claim the Persians had millions of soldiers, which, okay, we know now that was a wild exaggeration. But even modern estimates put Xerxes' force at around 300,000 people. Now, you have to understand, back in the ancient world, just moving, feeding, and watering an army that big was considered completely impossible. So the big question is, how on earth did the Persians pull it off?
Well, it really came down to a fundamental difference in how they thought about supply. See, Greek armies, they typically just lived off the land. They'd forage as they went. And it's fine if you're a small force. But for a massive army, that's a recipe for absolute disaster. The Persians, on the other hand, they planned for this for years in advance.
What they did was incredible. They set up this whole network of fortified supply depots, they called them magazines, that stretched all the way from what's now Turkey deep into Europe, and these were pre-stocked with grain, with supplies, everything they'd need. They expanded the road networks through the Balkans just so their baggage trains could move efficiently. And their communication? It was light years ahead of anything the Greeks had, all thanks to something called the Ingarium, this legendary relay system of mounted couriers. I mean, think about it. This wasn't an invasion. This was a centrally planned operation on a scale that could rival a modern military.
The logistics, that was only part of the story. The Persians didn't just move across the landscape. No, they actively reshaped the world itself to fit their needs. And they did it with some of the most breathtaking feats of engineering you can imagine.
Just take the Hellespont, for example. That's the treacherous strait that separates Asia from Europe. To get his army across, Xerxes ordered a bridge built that was, it was unlike anything anyone had ever conceived of. They literally lashed together over 600 warships, creating a double pontoon bridge. Then they anchored them with these enormous cables, tightened by massive wooden windlasses. And on top of that, they built a stable road, so solid that the army's pack animals could cross without even seeing the water below. This wasn't just a bridge, you guys. This was a floating highway. It was a statement to the world that the king could command the very oceans.
And if bridging an entire sea wasn't impressive enough, then there's the story of the Athos Canal. See, about 10 years earlier, a Persian fleet had been completely wrecked by a storm right off the Mount Athos peninsula. Xerxes was not going to let that happen again, so he ordered a canal to be dug straight through the land. For centuries, Western historians just scoffed at this. They called it a fabrication, a tall tale from Herodotus, just to make the Persians seem arrogant and hubristic.
But what if it was real? What if a 2-kilometer-long canal, wide enough for 2 warships to pass side by side, was actually dug? What would that tell us about an ancient empire that would undertake a massive civil engineering project deep in what was basically enemy territory, all just to protect its naval supply line?
Well, it was real. Modern geology, seismic surveys, they've all confirmed it. The canal existed right where Herodotus said it was. And this gets to the very core of the Persian mindset. They didn't bow to geography, they remade it. This whole thing was a combined arms operation, with the army and navy moving in perfect sync in a way that was centuries ahead of its time.
Okay, so beyond the brute force and the incredible engineering, the Persians were also masters of more subtle weapons, things like diplomacy, intelligence, and gold. In fact, their greatest strategic advantage wasn't their numbers. It was the fact that the whole idea of Greek unity was mostly a myth.
And that brings us to this really important concept called medizing. You see, for a lot of Greek city-states, Athens and Sparta weren't these glorious protectors of liberty. No, they were regional bullies. The Persians came along and offered an alternative. Join us. We'll give you stability, trade, protection under our vast empire. And you know what? A lot of Greeks took that deal.
Just look at how fractured the Greek world actually was. We always remember the Spartan and Athenian alliance, of course. But what about the other major players?
Thebes, a huge Greek power, actually fought for Persia in the final battle. The entire region of Thessaly, with its famous cavalry, they joined the Persian side. Argos decided to just stay neutral, which, let's be real, was as good as helping Persia. So this idea of a united Greece fighting for freedom, it's largely a fantasy cooked up later.
And Xerxes' intelligence network, they knew all of this. They knew the Spartans only really cared about defending their own little corner of the world, the Peloponnese. They knew the Athenians were terrified of losing their city. The entire Persian strategy was designed to exploit these cracks, using local agents, using bribery, using political pressure to make that fragile Greek alliance just crumble from within.
So this all brings us to the final and maybe most important point. We're all taught that Persia was defeated, right? But were they? Really? To answer that, you have to stop looking at the war from the Greek point of view and start looking at it from Xerxes.
I mean, let's look at this like a campaign scorecard. What was the #1 objective? It was to punish Athens for burning the Persian city of Sardis years before. And on that front, total success. Xerxes marched his army right into Athens, he captured the Acropolis, and he burned it to the ground. Check. Now, did he conquer all of Greece? No. But was the main punitive goal achieved? Absolutely.
And what about the idea that the Persian Empire collapsed after this supposed defeat? Not even close. The Achaemenid Empire remained the dominant superpower in the region for another 150 years. They continued to pull the strings in Greek politics, not with armies, but with gold. They'd fund Sparta to fight Athens, then they'd fund Athens to fight Sparta, always keeping them weak, always keeping them divided.
So yeah, the story of the 300 Spartans, it's an incredible story. It really is. But the real story, the story of the Persian invasion, is a testament to something else entirely. It's a triumph of the mind, of logistics, of engineering, and of grand strategy. And it leaves us with this one kind of provocative thought. While the Greeks were busy writing the heroic poems, it was the Persians, with their organizational genius, who were actually building the world.